For all intents and purposes, this is the conclusion to the rebel. To learn to live and die, and in order to be, let's say, a human, to refuse to be a god. I want to go back and talk about some of the things that we've talked about earlier this semester, and specifically how they relate to the rebel and how they tie things together. Again, I urge you, if you have questions, just stop me and we'll go back to whatever point we need to. I think one of the most important points that we made from the beginning of the class is that to be human is to essentially embody a paradox. I will try to take this slowly. I've had way too much coffee and my mind has been going at warp factor 10 since 5 a.m. So please slow me down if we need to. Being a part of is multidimensional. Because we have a body, we are tied to the world. We have a need to connect. And that need for community is ultimately inseparable from our need for intimacy. And similarly, we are apart from the world. All right, does this make sense so far?
Yeah, but do you mind pausing for a second?
I'm sorry, say that again?
I said yes, but do you mind pausing for a moment?
Yep. Okay. So a few weeks ago, we talked about what I would refer to as 3 core human needs. And they are intimacy, safety, and community. They are all tied to this paradox of being human. Myth begins at the moment when we need to, in Camus' terms, reconcile ourselves with the world. But myth also begins with the human demand for meaning. In the face of a silent universe. We never ultimately satisfy our demand for meaning. We don't know why we are different. We don't know why we are here, if there is a why. And that need for meaning, that need for community, intimacy, and safety never leaves us. Buber referred to the transcendent or God as the wholly other, as in totally other than the human that is somewhere there off in the distance.
Who referred to him?
Pardon?
Who referred to him as this?
Martin Buber.
Okay.
Thank you. 20th century Jewish theologian. Ritual, whether it's in society in general or in religion in specific, is designed to evoke intimacy, safety, and community, to bridge the gap between I and you. What's happened is that Darwin in the 19th century, and others, and perhaps as far back as Aristotle, by defining the world as logical, missed the fact that this demand for meaning, this attempt to reconcile ourselves, is not driven by logic. It is driven by emotion. I would take issue with Camus on one point, and that is that our solidarity, that which binds us together, is born here. When I recognize you as there alongside, I recognize in you the same paradox. Being human is the source of the paradox. But death, my death, mortality, my thrownness, is the crucible in which I confront a paradox. It is inescapable. Let me stop there. Are there any questions so far? Am I making sense, and is this helping?
It's a lot. Um, I don't necessarily understand how this all connects. I think I understand the paradox being. Wait, can you hear me? Or am I just talking to myself?
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I heard
Okay.
you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry. Okay, but
That's
yeah,
all
I
right.
think I understand the paradox of being human, but it gets a bit confusing with the body in the world and like the ties of community part. I understand intimacy, the three human needs, but I don't understand the rightmost side of the diagram.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I lost you in my last couple of comments. Is that correct?
No, not those, the ones before that. Body, world, tied to community, need to connect, my death, my individuality, those things right there.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's go back and focus on this then. Because I have a body, I'm connected to the world. But I also know that there's something fundamentally different about me. We're not like other life forms. And if we put this in Darwinian terms, it is a lack of instinct. It is self-awareness. Part of which ultimately makes me aware of the fact that I'm going to die. So as much as I am connected to the world with my body, my awareness of myself, my lack of instinct, my awareness of my death separates me from the world. So ultimately, I experience myself as an I, as in an individual. But because I have a body, I'm also tied to a community. You are like me. Remember our conversation about Merleau-Ponty, the body and sexuality. When I recognize you as there alongside me, I recognize the fact that you have a body. I also recognize the fact that you're thrown towards death. In part, my need for intimacy is a kind of rebellion against being alone. I don't want to deal with my death alone. I don't want to be alone in the world. So humans are constantly straddling the dichotomy of I and we. One of the reasons our society is falling apart is we become radical I. Libertarianism, whether it's on the left or the right. You can't tell me to get vaccinated, my body, my choice. In the end, philosophically, it's the same. On the other hand, we've seen in Marxism and some of the things that the progressive left wants, and the progressive and the conservative right, the elimination of all individuality. So the point that I'm making is we don't really know in the end whether we're I or we. We constantly, throughout the course of our lives, attempt to come to terms with balancing I and we. And because we feel that connection to the world, and because we can feel radically alienated and alone, we are driven by intimacy and by community and by the need to feel safe. Ritual is a way of moving us into a sacred space in which intimacy and community are possible in a safe environment. Whether it's laying a wreath at the grave of the unknown soldier or walking into a high mass in a Roman Catholic church, we move from the mundane to a deeper connection to those who are there with us. In the world of religion, it connects us to the transcendent. Animism, naturism. There is something profoundly holy, for lack of a better word. The ritual of holding someone's hand on a date evokes intimacy, safety, and community. Going for coffee with friends, hanging out, however you define it. The human world is filled with different types of rituals, some more formal than others. Because we can't solve the dilemma, because we can't figure out if we're I or we demand meaning from the universe. Why are we here? Who are we? What is the point of all this? And when we don't get an answer, we invent one. We call it myth. So we create a story that helps tie us back, that helps reconcile us with the world. We don't know in the end whether there is any, quote, validity to the myth or not. And it really doesn't matter, because myth ties us emotionally to the world and to those around us. Going to church is less about whether or not Jesus was the Messiah and more about connecting to people who share a similar body of beliefs. Does that help, Kelsey?
Yes, a lot. Thank you.
You're welcome. Are there any other questions? Okay, we've got a chat coming in. All right, I'm going to read you this. It's from Ashley. So in a sense, the paradox of being human attacks the human question by facing whether we are I or we. By attacking whether we are I or we, humans use Camus and Darwin's different meanings of humans to attempt to find a way to explain how we connect in the world and to others around us. The main way of doing this is by religion. The answer is oftentimes yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Now think in part about what we talked about last time. When Heidegger talks about dwelling poetically, I am caught between my individuality, my acute awareness, my acute separateness, my acute awareness of the fact that when I die, and my experience of you there alongside your death, your need to connect, your need to attach to the world, your living in that fundamental paradox. It is the same. So when I recognize that you're human in a very deep emotional sense, I know who you are. I know who you are. That's why when I love you, I take your death as my own. While you're thinking about that, if we focus on Darwin, if we focus on the legacy that led to Darwin and the world after Darwin, then what can we say? Well, number one, he missed the obvious. When we demythologize the world, we demythologize ourselves. Two, this shreds the paradox. In the end, when Camus talks about murder, when he talks about revolution and not rebellion, when you think about Rubishov and Darkness at Noon, there is no I, only we. But conversely, if you think about people like Kirillov, Laplace, and some of the others he names in The Rebel, the fact that I become a general, wage war, and get you killed because I'm too cowardly to commit suicide, too bad. It's all about me. And when you think about woke culture, that's where we are. It's all about me. I'm the only one who matters in my world. And if you look at the last 1,000 years of human history or more, we have constantly vacillated between point number 2 and point number 3. And Camus was saying that ultimately it isn't one or the other. I am my death. But the fact that I'm human means that I'm already in relationship to you. You're here with me. You're here alongside me. You are caught in the same paradox. You want the same intimacy, the same community, that same sense of being safe. You are confronting the universe. And the silence that comes back is the same silence that comes back for me. There is no other way to be in the world. Let me stop there. Questions, thoughts? Is this helpful? Do you see the point?
Who did you say said that? Camus?
Camus.
Okay.
It's my interpretation of what he's saying in the last chapter of The Rebel. What do you think? Talk to me. Am I making sense?
I think it makes sense.
Okay. Deanna, what do you think?
I think it makes sense, especially with like the shift of time going from there's no I, only we, to now it's more so no we and only I. Like it makes sense that he's basically saying that it's not one or the other, that it's both.
Good. Camille, how about you?
I agree.
Okay. Any questions at this point before we take it to the next point? Okay. Which means whether we choose to accept it or not, thrownness is a fact of human existence. So if we change or move from Heidegger to Camus, then when I realize that I am thrown towards my death, I can't change the facticity of your death. I can't save you from being thrown, but I can be there with you. So the commonality of living in the paradox binds us together. So from Camus' perspective, we are the community of the dying. We are the community of the throne. That which we know as the world is lit up by the facticity of death. Our intimacy, my love of you, your love of me, that which we call intimacy, is by its definition a rebellion against death. If I truly love you, I do so in a world in which all things die. And when Camus talks about in The Rebel the confrontation with uncertainty and ambiguity, it is precisely because all love is veiled in the shadow of death. All human actions are ultimately uncertain because so is my existence. And what makes love so powerful and so dangerous is that when I love you, not only do I take your death as my own, but I give you my death. And it's not that I'm alone, again, simply. I am alone now as I have never been before. And that moment is harrowing, devastating, beyond traumatic. In that moment, I'm forced again to confront the paradox. I am a part of, I am apart from. However hurt I might be, my need to touch you, my need to be touched, forces me again back into the paradox to again wager everything. Questions, thoughts? Again, is this helpful? Is it help bringing the class together, summarizing everything we've learned so far?
Yeah.
I wish you were sitting in front of me so I could see your faces and figure out what you were thinking and feeling. What are you thinking and feeling? What's going on in your heads?
I think like this all makes sense to me. I think especially when we were, I guess, on the last screen and you kind of talked about like this is all a part of like the human's desire to not be alone to face death. And it all makes sense in that sense. Like we want intimacy and safety in the community because the human experience, I guess, is set upon the fact that we know that we're all going to die. But this is about how we handle knowing that fact. And then I guess everything else is kind of connecting. People just don't want to be alone.
That's right. Yes. Well said. Well said. And if you think about some of the things that we talked about in the last class, it can't end well. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether I stop loving you or you stop loving me. If we last 75 years together, one of us will die. So the very act of loving is an act of defiance. It is an act of rebellion. It is a decision to embody not just the tragic, I'm going to do it anyway. So when Camus talks about defiance and rebellion, he implicitly is talking about courage. I dare to love you in a world in which all that is human die. I dare you to love me in a world in which all that is human dies. That's why when he talks about people like Kirlev and others, when he talks about Ivan Karamazov, murder makes sense. And that's what Koestler says about Rubishov. Murder makes sense. In a very dark way, we're all dead anyway. Strictly a matter of time. The only difference between Ivan Karamazov is murder is born in nihilism, and Rubishov it's born in absolute truth. But it doesn't change the fact that in the end I die. In the end, you die. To dwell poetically is essentially an act of rebellion. I choose to stand between I and we. I choose again to confront the ambiguity of the universe. I demand again meaning. And I defiantly, like Prometheus, do what I have to do. Or like Sisyphus, I push the stone back up the hill. As Camus said, the only thing that we can do is envision Sisyphus happy, smiling as he does it. Love is the smile on Sisyphus's face. Love is standing between the earth and the sky, between I and we. Love is learning to live not as a god, but as a human, in a world in which all that is human dies. That human existence is ultimately tragic is not the point. The point is, what do we do with tragedy? All right, we have a question. When you were talking about Ivan, you said love was born in nihilism. When you were talking about Koestler, absolute truth. The difference between Ivan Karamazov, if we contrast Ivan and Rubishov, And Camus' point, and one of the points I've been making all the way through the semester, is that in the end, it doesn't matter. Murder is murder. The only question is, how do we avoid the ambiguity? How do I know that when I act, it doesn't end up taking someone's life? So when Camus talks about acting cautiously, there is a clear sense of anxiety. I can do the loving thing and someone can still end up dead. And in a very strange way, that takes us all the way back. The universe is fundamentally ambiguous and silent. There is no truth. Not with a capital T. But if I'm going to fill that emptiness, if I'm going to have intimacy and community, I have no choice but to act. I can love you and lay down my life. But as Camus says, the sacrifice is still murder. The best that we can do is love anyway. So is Camus saying ultimately that we should never sacrifice ourselves? No, I don't think he is. I can't die for you. But I can die in place of you. So Kelsey, what do you think of that?
I mean, I guess it makes sense in that, because when we were initially talking about the concept of murder versus murder, I wasn't like completely getting it, but I guess I understand more in this sense.
Okay, Maya, what do you think?
Like I'm starting to get everything, and everything is starting to make sense, and like the whole
Okay.
class is like the whole class is starting to make sense now.
Good. Dasani, what do you think?
I agree. I think it's starting to all come together.
Okay. Eldon, how about you? Are you still there? Let's see, we have a chat. It could be Eldon. I'm sorry, Eldon. If you have a comment, you can type in, that's fine. If not, I understand. So if we go back to the beginning of what we were saying today. In terms Heidegger might understand. Let's see, we've got a comment. Good, thank you. If we think about ultimately the concept of earth and sky. My body ties me to the earth. My death ties me to the sky. I am the measure. I am torn between being a part of and apart from. It is the inescapable part of being human. If you go back to an earlier lecture, despair and denial, the world of the herd, denies my separateness. It denies that I am apart from. But when I engage you and engage the world from a position of Sorg, I am living the measure between earth and sky. I am the measure. That's why Nietzsche said, whatever is done from love always occurs beyond good and evil. It is why the answer to the human question is to love in a world in which all that is human dies is both the ultimate act of futility and the ultimate act of meaning. They are as bound together as we are bound to the earth and to the sky. So when we look back over everything that we've discussed this semester, we can see that Aristotle and Marx and Mill and Bentham and Descartes and all of the others who stress logic over emotion end up in a world that's filled with murder and violence and hate, objectification, sexism, racism, the essence of a life negative culture is that it chooses we over the dichotomy, the paradox of I and we. If there is a path forward, we have to restore the paradox. So when Camus says that there is but one rule for order in the modern world, and that is to learn to live and die like a human being and not a god, it is a call to go back to the paradox of being human. And so you see, I've come to doubt all that I once held as true. I stand alone without belief. The only truth I know is you. And as I watch the drops of rain weave their weary paths and die, I know that I am like the rain, and there but for the grace of you go I. So it comes down to this. We can choose to continue to let the world be as the world has been. Or, like Nietzsche, Heidegger, and Camus, despite the foibles of their being human, I have not forgotten that Heidegger was a Nazi. I am ashamed of that. But beneath it all, the way back is the only way forward. The reclamation of our humanity is ultimately the only answer. So, as I've said to you many times this semester, the world has changed for better or worse, one life at a time. Every revolution in the history of the world, for better or worse, began with one person who saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. Teaching is my revolution. I will take attendance. If there are any last questions, please ask them now. And then after attendance, I will let you go. Any questions?
No, but I just wanted to say thank you, and like thank you for like tying the final knots, because everything kind of just came together with the last few comments that you made.
Thank you. I'm going to pause recording and take attendance, assuming this will respond.